pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, this evening is as part of the ongoing budget deliberation process, we have scheduled a public question and answer period. I think we're here to hear your questions and best we can to answer them related to the budget. Before that, we have a little bit of business to do. One of the items is we need to add an agenda item. So I need a motion to add an agenda item, which is to adopt the Board of Education Budget Adjustment Guidelines dated January 21st, 2020.
Move that the Weston Board of Education
No,
adopt.
not yet.
Oh, sorry.
Just to add the agenda item.
Okay.
So moved. Yeah.
Okay.
So moved.
So
So
moved.
moved. Second? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Agenda item added. So first, I want to thank Superintendent and the Board of and the administration for all of the hard work they've done in the last 2 weeks in terms of answering all the board's questions. Some were good ones, some were not so good ones, some were annoying ones, some were out of left field, but like we said at the beginning, patience. We're all trying to get to the same place together in partnership. This part of the process, what tried to do is really the board leadership tried to put together a document, and what this document is meant to do is through our caucus process is really escalate our thoughts on budget adjustments from here. So I want to put this document into the public record, and without going it into detail, kind of outlines a few guidelines in terms of what the board would like to see as we move forward into the next phase of the budget process, which is the budget adjustment process before we actually vote to adopt the budget. So just some high-level guidelines that the board has set is one is, and I'm just going to go through some of the highlights. We know that there's going to be a budget adjustments in 3 areas. One is administrative and shared function and shared functions, shared administrative functions. Second is program offering and program delivery, and the third is class size. And we'd like for the superintendent and the administration, as we proceed through the budget adjustment process, to deal with them in that order of prioritization. The second is that in order for us to be confident that we are comfortable that we've really stressed the budget in a number of different ways, we'd like to see 2 scenarios done over the course of the next week or so. One is a budget that is going to be 2.5% up versus the 2019-20 budget, and a budget that is flat. And we'd like to basically take a look at those scenarios versus the proposed budget so that we can have a robust discussion around where we really as a board would be comfortable going before we make a final decision. And the third part of this document is some guidelines that the board has kind of brought to the administration's attention over the course of the last 2 weeks in terms of where we would like to focus our attention in terms of looking at adjustments. These are just recommended guidelines, and they're basically it just compiles a list that has already been discussed, but we wanted to put it in one place so that the board can use that as a rough guideline to basically take a look at which areas, and it's mostly the areas where there's been the most questions and maybe the most concerns to actually dig into before they dig into other areas. The one thing that we would like to prioritize last is any adjustments to Hurlbut with the middle school and the high school. We basically, if there's cuts to be made, adjustments to be made in the budget, we'd like to basically get there last, not first. And so with that, I'd like a motion to actually adopt the guidelines.
Move that the Weston Board of Education adopt the document entitled Board of Education Broad Budget Adjustment Guidelines dated January 21st, 2020.
You have a second? All in favor? Okay. Motion adopted. Right. Okay, now let's move to our regularly scheduled program, which is Q&A from the public. When you come up to the microphone, just identify yourself and your address, and we will attempt to answer your questions best we can, or listen to your concerns or your endorsements. Okay. Closer to the mic, yeah. Yeah.
Green is good. Herb Cotter, 140 Old Hyde, Weston, resident for 43 years. My kids have gone to this school system. We've had any number of foster children from Weston in the school system, and I now have grandchildren in the school system. I am a strong supporter in education as the principal thing that is important for children's success. However, we have a serious problem in this town, and the decisions that you, my neighbors, are going to be making your fiduciary responsibilities in this budget cycle have the ability to stop a tsunami hitting Weston in a few years, or to prevent the earthquake that will cause that tsunami. Here's the math on this thing. We all know assessed values are directly driven by market value. And we all know that our market values are going to go down. If we all have the same decline in market value, and if the tax increase or the taxes don't increase at all, no big deal. We pay the same taxes. But the reality is, the higher priced homes in town, market value is declining on a greater percentage than the lower value, which I'll assert that most of the houses, most of the households in this town are that lower value. The end result of that is that most of the families, even if the budget for the town stayed flat, are going to see a tax increase at the next assessment cycle. Right now it's sort of holding steady because the assessment gets done every 5 years or so. With a tax increase that's potential, it gets even worse on the vast majority of households in this town. And you all know where that goes. As our house prices have fallen, as taxes have increased, we have more folks moving out of town, which cause more vacant homes, less folks interested in buying in a town with high taxes, and thus the tsunami starts. Tax base erodes, confidence in the town. The challenge that you have as the fiduciary for us, the folks that are paying the bill, and you're paying the bill also, obviously, is to find a way to do the most important thing for our children, which is focus whatever dollars we have on education. Not on what I call overhead, which is administration. It's not on buildings. It's choose the pieces that make sure our kids get the best possible education. With that, you have one heck of a job ahead of you, and I thank you for taking the time to work on this problem with real diligence.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Sorry, I came in late. Is this, I gathered the time for public comment?
Yes.
Okay, apologize. My name is Eric Struminger, and I live here in Weston. I have 2 kids, one in Hurlbut and one hopefully to be in Hurlbut in a couple of years. And I got a couple of comments that I'd like to share. First of all, this budgetary process is going to involve decisions on cost cutting. And I want to advocate that we make decisions within a framework that has a long-term view and that we don't just react on a yearly basis to budgetary pressures. You know, if we focus on long-term productivity enhancement, we're going to get better outcomes. There's some facts I think we need to consider here. The state has forecast that the rate of increase in retiree cost is going to accelerate. That should affect us similarly. We run a risk of Hartford cramming down costs to municipalities. They've tried it before, haven't been successful, but stands to reason they may try it again. And you know, just dovetailing on what the previous speaker was saying, we have a mill rate in Weston that is already level that makes it arguably less desirable for current and prospective residents. So if we take a long-term view about driving efficiency gains, you know, in the worst case, we're wrong about the need and we're wrong about the budgetary pressures, we can reinvest it into educational outcomes. So that's sort of point number one. Point number two, I think we should evaluate past decisions. So last year there was a budget presented and there was pushback on the cost increases, and so there were cost cuts that were made. And I think that the board should evaluate whether these cost cuts that were made had the adverse outcomes that were predicted by the administration. And I think it's worthwhile just remembering what was said. So I'm going to read here a little bit from the recommended budget. This is on page 20. It says, any budget flexibility or discretion that may have existed in the past several years is now gone. We have a history of making budget cutbacks and finding efficiencies such that we no longer have the capacity to use existing resources to manage shortfalls, which is a fairly dire prediction about impacts. Also on page 22, for now it has to be understood that the cuts in any of these areas will substantially put at risk the quality of the Weston Public Schools. And then one last one, and this is in the final budget that was presented on April 8th of 2019. The majority of the recommended reductions affect administrative and ancillary functions, but there are reductions that impact programs and personnel. Okay, so this is what was said, and I think we need to really go back and look on a line-by-line basis. Did we make good choices? Did it affect outcomes? And the ones that were specifically made that affect the classroom, were they adverse to educational outcomes? In particular, the decision regarding the change in the transportation policy, going to outsourcing from insourcing, I think needs to be evaluated. The framework that we use to analyze it, and did we do this right? Third point I would make is that we should question the premise stated in the recommended budget last year that it's a budgetary fallacy, and that's in quotes, that we have flexibility or discretion to cut. It appears to me that 10% of the budget is with external vendors, and there should be some flexibility in negotiation there. 10% is just 10%, but on our budget, that's $5 million or so, and that's real money. And I don't think we should overlook it. Central office costs, including the number of superintendents and the ratio of administrative support to managers, I think could also be evaluated. And then lastly, I think that in every budget, it would be good to see a sustainability impact. This is something that we see in annual reports by public corporations, and I think that any changes that we're going to make we should have a view to the impact on sustainability. And with that, I think I will conclude.
Bill, I think there was one question in there in terms of where you're seeing the implications of some of the things we didn't do last year. We chose not to, or we chose to reduce the budget, and some of the impacts we're seeing as a result of that this year.
I mean, well, I mean, that's quite a big question on the spot, so, and it's
Yeah,
quite a
sorry.
big budget. I mean, I think we could look at the transportation topic, I mean, because the simple shift outsourcing is not the reason for the cost overrun this year. That is just something we can speak to tonight, speak to in more detail with the board. I mean, that's about a 300,000 or so unexpected cost. Remember, 2 years ago, we had 1.6 million overage in special ed. We brought that under control, at least for now. So, as with many districts, are used to overages and managing those, looking multi-year. I mean, we are prepared to speak tonight some to the transportation issue, because that was a decision, but again, the outsourcing wasn't the reason for the overrun. We're in a transition there. We'd anticipate that would come down. There was very strong statements in the run-up in last year's budget to if certain decisions would made, and we documented it down to the nickel. Several years of reductions away from the core work, away from the classroom, away from the fundamentals here, curriculum, pedagogy support, SILs, all the rest. We did not touch that. We had said if we're pushed into that, it would have those effects. We did not go there. Fortunately, the board found the wisdom. We found some ways to make some reductions. The dental shift, which we pulled out of the the internal service fund, that avoided some of those cuts to core. But that, again, has caught up with Weston. I mean, this year it's more significant. That's why, it's, as we said, it's a much bigger request than we ever wanted. To get it down to a lower number, and in your guidelines document from the board talks about class sizes. It talks about potential administration reductions. It talks about curriculum and instruction support reductions. So Weston is now into cutting the core of what has set it apart as an exemplary district. The transportation piece, I don't know, Phil, if you want to speak some to that, or we can come back to in the workshop, or how do you want to, just to clarify? Okay. But that's definitely a question we can come back to.
Sure.
Because I think that was a pivotal decision last year. It's clearly not satisfactory to us in terms of how it's played out this year, nor to the board or the community, and we can explain that.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, maybe we can move to other business, which is the outstanding questions from the board members. I think at this point, there's a number of outstanding questions that the board has had over the course of the last 2 weeks. And I think we're probably going to use this opportunity to prioritize them, because we quickly have to go from question mode to solutions, because we do have less than half a month before we need to vote on adopting a budget. Before we get to that, I think there's a real theme emerging amongst all of the comments, which is how do we actually maintain the level of excellence which the community expects at a reasonable cost. And, you know, a lot of it, there's some structural issues. When you look at efficiency metrics and you look at outcome metrics, right? We, because of the configuration of our campus, because of the size of our student populations, tend to look on the less efficient end of the of our DIRG. The question is going to be, how do we actually, is that an excuse that we have to live with, or can we do something about it? And I think the way we're approaching it in this budget cycle is to try to look systematically at things that we can do that are structural changes, so that not only can we move into the more efficient side of the spectrum, but it will also allow us to create capacity to reinvest in some of those things that affects outcomes. And so I think that this is not we're not looking for kind of a one-year quick fix, but we're really looking for some really bold ideas that can lead to some structural changes that'll help us over time really not just reduce the cost or not just contain the cost, but also to create capacity to reinvest in things that are going to make our outcomes even better than they are today. That's really the challenge that we all have, and that's what makes the process this year a little bit more challenging than most, because I agree we are at an inflection point, and we need to actually do some real hard thinking about how to set the course that's going to help us in years to come, not only this year alone. So, outstanding questions.
Well, we've been, since January 6th, creating a running list of the questions from the board. They're before you. Also, for the community, we have copies since we're in a public meeting, but everyone at this table should have a set. In past years, the budget process has had a set deadline for the board to submit questions, and then there's been about a one-week turnaround for written responses coming back. The number totaling questions so far this year, we're at some 76, 77. That tracks very neatly with the last several years. The issue, though, now is with 1 week before us, not half a month, you as a body have to vote by the end of next week per charter, or at the end of next week on the budget. A lot of these questions have been answered, either some in writing. We have a couple more answers we can give you today, and if you want, in terms of the FTE work, which is very important analysis in terms of looking at the last 9 years, what the FTE evolution has been, as Lewis is prepared to speak to that. Can also speak to some of the organizational chart questions that are here, so we could do a little bit of that tonight. But we've been keeping a running track record here of what was answered in the various workshops. You as a board have had many more workshops, and you have another one this week, so you've been very active. So the agreement was, instead of submitted written questions and in response written questions, was more of a running record, and in the workshops trying to answer those. As you and I have discussed, though, Tony, with a week out, I think I really would ask the board prioritize what's left, and also now with the guidelines you've given us, if in the next several days we're going to be serious about coming back with thoughts on the 2.25 or the 0, I think our energies really need to be there, because any energy spent answering a question takes us off trying to figure out scenarios that get us to at least your guidelines and some thoughtful response there.
Yeah,
Some of these questions could be very important. Again, the FTE analysis is critical. That is illuminating. It's going to show you things that the community and you need to know in terms of how actually FTE overall has been dropping with enrollment, except in one major category, one major area of provision of services, and then we can do the org chart. But again, I think you need to take a moment as a board, look at the list of questions, what's not been answered. I know there's been questions about how we list our SPED students to protect privacy. We've shifted away from grade-by-grade listing, because in this smaller community, if you list 8, 9 students per grade, it becomes quite identifiable who those students are. So we have presented the total number. Mike Rizzo can speak a little bit to that. We think it's critically important to stay at that overall count, because it tells you fundamentally what you need to know in terms of what is a factor there. But instead of me talking and talking, I think you need to look at the list, give us some sense of what your priorities are. Again, bearing in mind, you've rightly so given us a challenge now in terms of coming back with some cost reduction scenarios.
Yeah, I personally would love to see the bulk of the week spent on looking at those different scenarios, but I'd leave it to my fellow board members to kind of chime in on things that they would like to see as a priority. Um, Just, but as a reminder, we quickly need to get to solutions.
If a friendly amendment, I mean, a number of these questions are in essence picked up by trying to address the scenarios.
Yeah.
So are there any other questions that we're going to go through today? Anything that you have answers to tonight? That
Yeah,
you can
we've got
give
the
us?
FTE analysis, if you want to look at that. We've got the org chart analysis, if you want to look at that. We have the technology, Craig, you have your material, right? We have the technology staffing material. All of that fits with some pretty significant questions you've had as a board. Mike can speak to some of the PPS SPED questions, particularly the SPED enrollment counts. We can speak to that. So that's several pretty significant sets of questions.
Yeah, I think going through the FTE question is actually a good one, because instead of just looking at the overall population and the evolution of the population, it does give you some granularity of the ins and outs and where we've added and where we've reduced. And I think it gives you some good granularity to get some more context around how headcount has been shifting between the different areas over time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've passed around a chart that has 3 sheets to the spreadsheet that analyzes, going back to the 13-14 school year, the FTE changes in the district. And what you're going to see is a story of, as Tony said, a shifting of FTE, primarily from the regular education world into the special education world. And, you know, I want to emphasize right off the bat that this is not, most of these changes are driven by legal requirements. So special education is a legal and moral requirement of the district to provide a fair, affordable, equal education to, well, affordable is not in there, fair and equal education for special ed students. And that requires, through the IEP process, the individualized education plan process, that plans be put in place for individual students. A lot of the times that requires a paraprofessional that sometimes is a one-on-one, as we call it, para, and sometimes it's a one-on-2 or 3. But a lot of the times we have had to add paraprofessional positions. And if you're looking at page 1, which is the full chart of the district's FTE, broken into categories, of course, you will see that the largest increase in FTE since 2013 is 13.12, and those are paraprofessionals who handle special education students. The overall, the district has added 6.4 FTE in that time period, but it has reduced based on enrollment at the intermediate school, at the elementary school, and at the middle school. There are increases at the high school of 3.1 FTE, which includes in it the addition of the writing center teacher and the addition of the science research program teacher, which are very recent changes to the budget. Otherwise, it's fairly balanced, and the increases are primarily in the areas of special education. For instance, under BCBA, and I want to note this, under the BCBA's board-certified behavioral analysts who handle students, sometimes students with autism, which is a growing area of our population in the district. And we started out with now, on 2013-14, no BCBAs on staff. However, these positions have always existed. They were just outsourced at a higher cost, and over time we added our own BCBAs for 2 reasons. One is we felt it was economically advantageous, but also because we now have full-time BCBAs and there's very little, if any, turnover. When you outsource, you frequently see turnover. People who go to work for school districts, people who start their own businesses, and so forth, and it made a lot of sense to do this. But again, those positions existed, they just didn't, they were outsourced. There is a 3.1 additional special education teachers, and then I mentioned the increase at the high school. You'll see the administrative increase at the top. Back in 2013-14, we had 12.6 FTE administration, and the 0.6 was a 0.6 elementary assistant principal, at Hurlbut. We added that back in 2017-18 to carry the load of of a lot of things that happen at the elementary school, but also the evaluation process, which is critical, and it was very much needed for that. That position previously was a combined position with the CIL for PE and health. That's being handled by a different a teacher, actually, which is what CILs are part of the teacher group. And then in 2018-19, we added the additional assistant director for special education, again, to deal with the growing needs in SPED, to deal with increasing numbers of PPTs, and to do things right. We felt that we were trying to handle too much work with too few people, and that is why that's there. Now, what really tells the picture is the next 2 pages. The next page is FTE changes since 2013, excluding special education positions. And I put in here the counselors, the school psychologists, and social workers, because those positions are not truly SPED positions. They help with that, but they're also very much regular ed positions. And you'll see that the district has reduced 14.82 FTE during that time. So over the last 7 years, we've reduced that many positions. Again, you see the reductions in enrollment-driven changes at Hurlbut WIS in the middle school. You see a change in counselors. Part of that was an elimination. Part of that was the adding in a switch from counselor to a school psychologist at Hurlbut to handle the testing needs, the special education testing needs at Hurlbut. So we now have 2 school psychologists. The biggest area of change was in the area of the non-certified staff, which was a 6.21 regular ed paras. So those are people who offer extra help with reading, with science, math. So the people the paras who assisted the teachers in providing that instruction. Facility staff, 2.6 facility staff, 3 security specialists, and that was from a high in 2013-14 of 9, which was, as some might recall, we added 4 security specialists after Sandy Hook. And over time, as we improved our relations and our coordination with the police department, the addition of 2 SROs, extensive security cameras installations, the decision was made to reduce that number down to the current staffing level of 6. Transportation, as was discussed earlier, that number of 1.43 was due to the outsourcing. It just occurred last year, and we were up to 2.05, which included the transportation coordinator as well as the individual part-time drivers that we used for those positions. And then support staff, overall, that's your administrative assistants and so forth. Some of them are in the special ed world. Some of them are in the are more directly related to the principal, the principal's assistants, or assistants in central office, and that's been down about 0.87. If it's equating that to a 10-month position, that's roughly 1 position. So all said and done, you can see there that 14.82 positions have been eliminated since 2013. Now, of course, that was not the whole story, because in special education, we had to invest in that. That is our legal, moral obligation, and we did. There are parts that are not part of a direct IEP, for sure. So, for instance, as I said, we added the 1 additional assistant director in 2018-19, but that was critical to help manage it, because we were having some difficulties and some major cost overruns, and the staffing of the administration to deal with it was necessary to get a hold on that. Preschool, we added a 0.5 FTE. Our preschool is a combined special education, regular education program, but it is primarily, the reason we have it in the district is to service special education needs. The special education certified staff, those are SPED teachers, up 3.1. And then, as I mentioned before, the 4 BCBAs. And then there you go, the 13.12 paras for a total increase of 21.8. Thus your overall increase. But it's a shift. It's a shift of focus of the resources of the district. And it's not as if we haven't been cutting over the last several years to address enrollment changes, because we have. And that was one of the reasons we dug into this, in addition to the board's questions. We wanted to see, because having been here for 10 years, it sure felt like we cut a lot of positions, and we did. But we've added a lot of special education related positions. So that's, happy to answer any questions,
Yeah.
but that's that
Louis?
Mike,
analysis.
you want to add anything?
Yeah, Louis, I'd like to focus on where we've actually eliminated positions.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you can, or anyone can talk to where we're seeing the biggest negative impact of where we've actually eliminated positions, and
Sure.
what has happened as a result of it.
So, you know, I mean, others can speak to this as well. In my observations, the impacts that we have felt have primarily been the result of changes in the support staff structure on the special education side, because we did eliminate a 1.5 FTE and then added back a 1, which is a district-wide position, which I think is working very well. But there have been concerns and ongoing discussions with the teachers union over, because there's been a shift of some, you know, of the clerical side of the work to the teachers, because we don't have the people to do the same amount of work. So that's been an issue. Certainly the facility staff cuts over time have, I think we've all seen the effect of that, particularly at the grounds level. The buildings we have cut back, but we have maintained a reasonable level of custodial service. A lot of the concerns we hear about the cleaning issues really are a result of our ongoing relationship with the cleaning company, which is new this year. But the custodians who are here to, you know, they do cleaning too, but they do a lot more. We haven't reduced that much there. It's really been on the grounds and maintenance side, and we've seen the results of that, and that's been a problem. Certainly reducing teachers at the elementaries as a result of enrollment is not an issue. We have, at least for the last 10 years, maintained the district's class size guidelines. We've done that well and carefully, so I don't see an impact there. So the real issue has been more on the facility side and in the support side in the buildings, which I think we really can't go any deeper there without causing real problems.
Any other questions?
Mike, I have a question.
Yeah.
We received your kind of over bird's eye view. I was wondering
Is
if
your
you
mic
could
on?
share-
If you-
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? I'm wondering if you can share, I think the information that was provided last year, it told a story just in terms of what was happening in district and what was happening out of district.
And-
I don't think we need to see at the by grade level.
Mhm.
I think, can you just shed a little bit more light in terms of number of students in district versus out of district?
Sure.
How is that comparative to last year and the year prior?
Absolutely. In fact, I amended the sheet that I handed out to include that, and I'm going to send it
Great.
via the process that we have, but I'll
Great.
give you the verbal right now.
Great.
Also on that sheet, Ruby, was the students identified as eligible under Section 504. So that number is approximately 222 students. We have also on that sheet was the number of students receiving services as gifted and talented. That's 73. We have students placed out of district per their IEP, which is that number is 15. And settlement agreements are 23. So those are the same numbers that were represented on that page 161 in the prior budget. I think just in a way that certainly maintains the confidentiality. If I could just speak to the sheet for a moment.
Sure.
You know, what we see here is you know, a growing, an increase in the students eligible for special education services. As I've said to this group and many groups, you know, it's very consistent experience that Weston is having. It's very consistent with the state data, which I provided, and with towns in the area. So, specifically in 2014-15, there were approximately 200 students. We're now at approximately 249 students. That's excluding our preschool. With our preschool, it's a little bit higher. So, that is a common trend. Our current rate of identification is about 10.9%. That's a very reasonable rate in terms of area towns and the number of students that they're serving under special education. I think I'm frankly pleased that number is rising a bit because I do think that perhaps in previous years some of those numbers were a little lower than what might have been expected. So I think we're sort of aligning with sort of the norm there. And also I just wanted to just for the sake of clarity, the asterisks that were provided in that sheet were actually, those were suppressed by the state. So that wasn't something that I chose to do. Those are numbers that were not reported by the state as a result of the low numbers in those categories. So that's how those asterisks came to be on that sheet.
If I might, Tony and board, one of the items on your chart, your guideline speaks to potentially pulling back on the administrative and support within the SPED arena. And we need to go back as a team, cabinet principals, look at the list more. I mean, this is one I just want to give a few preliminary thoughts on. I know Mike can give some data on these issues.
Sure.
I mean, I don't want the community to lose sight of the fact that 2 years, well, let me say this. Special ed parents have come to Mike, because he runs roundtables, and they've said it becomes difficult for us when special ed is called out in budget discussions. And a couple years ago at the February forum that happens annually, the League of Women Voters, two parents were very brave, and they went to the mic and challenged me as superintendent for calling out too much the SPED relationship. My strong statement, and every word I say matters to me, and I'm very willing to go back and look at those from last year and previous years, is we in Weston have to embrace every single student here. It's a moral issue, it's a fundamental issue, and we should be a community that if we have growth in our special ed community, we should embrace that. And that's rooted in families that see connections here, because fundamentally you cannot provide any kind of education, but certainly SPED, without deep connections and understanding. We can definitely get better for all students in the connection making. But people say, what's your comparative advantage in Weston? So we can create very strong connections amongst our professionals and our students, particularly in the SPED arena. Now, we can't lose sight that a couple years ago, we were on a terrible path at 1.6 million over budget that was dramatically undermining what we could provide for SPED students, but also for all our students. And that's part of where we started to begin to make reductions that have given us less flexibility now, but very transparent with the town, monthly reporting to the Board of Ed, the Board of Finance on that. Ultimately, we reduced about 600,000. The town came through with $1 million. But now we are looking at an overage in special education and transportation of some maybe 300,000, a much different number than 1.6 million. Our legal costs are up some, but this is an area where, again, it's quality services first. It's not about the dollars, it's quality services first, that we are trying to manage that more effectively. Some of the numbers Mike will share with you, if we were to pull back on the assistant director role, the Mike Rizzo role, and turn that work on SPED and SPED over to the principals and assistant principals, as is happening in other districts, we, I think, would be going down a path of not providing the services and opening ourselves up to the kind of problems right now that are facing Greenwich, facing Monroe. I'm hearing Westport maybe verging on some more problems. Trumbull. These are all communities around us very much struggling to provide quality services. So I think some of the numbers here may help understand the real issue here. Again, it's quality services for quality children and quality families.
Yeah, let me jump in let me jump in for a second. First of all, I don't think anyone's suggesting that we don't fulfill our moral, legal, and ethical obligation to the children who are in need. I think that as a budgetary item alone, we would be remiss if we didn't ask questions about the head count and potential efficiencies. And can we do a better, can we actually fulfill those obligations in a more cost-efficient manner? If we can't, well, that's a discussion we should have. But I think we would be remiss if we didn't actually raise the question. Not to say that This is not something that we're targeting or calling out individually. This is one item amongst a number of different items that we need to discuss as part of the budget process.
Yeah,
That's
no,
really it.
yeah, and no, that's very well said. I mean, my point, the questions are excellent.
Yeah.
The questions are excellent, and thus the answers are critical. I'm taking your good point as chair, as to members of the community, we should not be commenting on whatever the background or needs of a student.
Right.
In Weston, we should embrace all our students, and we need to find a way to provide those services. Given the question's been asked, I think it's helpful to the board to get some sense, and at least in that critical realm, what kind of work's required.
Yeah. So I was able to just pull some data on some of the roles. So specifically, and this is an interesting number to me, that we ran, I think I mentioned this last meeting or last Monday, we ran approximately 50 more planning and placement team meetings last year. Why is that important? It's important because those are the meetings that plan for the individual students, for their needs, and really address each individual's needs. So by having more meetings, I think it goes to exactly what Dr. McCursey was just saying, that we're establishing those connections, and we're coming back, we're discussing, and we're making adjustments to those programs so that students can have the best program possible. Given the number of students, if you run the average, there was approximately 3 planning and placement team meetings per special education student last year, if you just run it by an average. 800 and some odd meetings divided by the number of students. So what that shows me is that we're coming back and we're having those discussions, we're making those program adjustments, not only looking at what the student needs, but how can we find ways to grow that student's independence and have that student be a larger part of the school community in any way that's possible. So that's one number that is, the 50 additional meetings is important to me. On top of that, just specifically thinking about the assistant director positions, and the phrase too much work for too few people, I think is a very accurate phrase. So the 2 assistant directors for special education last year ran each between 165 and 175 planning and placement team meetings, right? That's on top of the meetings that are run by our building-based administrators. Each assistant principal and principal is running meetings as well. Those numbers range between 40 and 60 meetings per year, depending on the individual. So the amount of work that takes is really, really significant. I believe that it's also not just walking into that meeting and running the meeting. It's knowing the student, knowing the teachers, talking ahead of time with the family to see if there's concerns that can come up and be addressed. It's really planning thoughtfully about what that process looks like. So that's a tremendous amount of work, and work that I'm very proud of that we're doing here, because I really do believe that we continue to make progress and that we continue to meet the individual needs of students. So that's one set of statistics that I think is very helpful. I will just talk briefly about the paraprofessionals, because it was something, obviously, the increase of 13 over that 5-year period, 6-year period, is something that maybe I should talk about. So paraprofessionals are important parts of our staff. They spend a tremendous amount of time with our students. They work with our teachers. They, of course, always work at the direction of a teacher and help us implement student programs. As students' needs become more and more complex, oftentimes those students will need to have support across their school day. And paraprofessionals are one way in which a school system can accomplish that, and we are doing that. I also looked at our statistics for students and the time they spend in the general education setting. And Melissa, I think that was a question you had asked at one point. I think it's a great question. We have, oh geez, the number's going to escape me now. 1 second, I have it. %85 of our students spend 70% or more of their time in the general education classroom. 85% of our students spend 70% or more of their time in the general education classroom. So what that tells me is our students are getting the supports they need in the individualized settings, the small group settings, perhaps with a special education teacher or another certified adult staff member, and then they're going back into the classroom and they're doing the work that they can do with the regular education peers in a regular education classroom setting and benefiting from that experience. That takes paraprofessional support. And in fact, that is an efficiency if you want to look at it in that way, because that does not necessarily require at all times a certified staff member to do that. So by looking at our resources and really building that continuum of services, using all members of the school community, we're able to address those needs. So those are just a couple of the things that I think have really put Weston in a very good position to continue to make progress and meet the needs of our students. And of course, I can answer any other questions as they come up through the process.
Which one is this? This is
So the document that's, Tony, you mind if I start?
what's that?
I was going to talk about that document.
Yes.
You're right, okay.
Yep.
So the document that's going around now is the next iteration of the organizational chart, and I will preface this by saying this is still a work in progress. As we discussed at the last meeting, I wanted to see how deep the board really wanted to go with regard to who reports to whom. However, the other piece that's in progress is the board had asked that for the titled positions that there be bullet points as to the primary areas of responsibility. Those will be forthcoming, but first I wanted to show you what I'm using as the basis for that work. So what you see here, originally what you had received from us was the cabinet under the superintendent and the 4 principals. And what we've done here is we've broken out each member of the central office administration and the principals and who is the immediately reports to them. Obviously, there's a lot more depth. I mean, the teachers all theoretically all report to the principal and the assistant principal. There's all the paras we just discussed. I mean, you could go very deep, but what we tried to do is go to the first levels of reporting for each of the positions. Now, you'll note under my position, you have the security specialist. Now, really, they report on a day-to-day basis to the assistant principals. We added it here just because it's a new responsibility, and I oversee the whole operation. Doesn't need to be there. It's just there because it was the other level of reporting. But then you'll have, and I apologize to Dr. Craw, I wanted to add that for the 11 curriculum instructional leaders, those aren't 11 full FTEs. It's closer, I think it's 5.5, is that right? 5.5 FTE. So our curriculum instructional leaders are teachers who have a release time to do the coaching and the instructional leadership that's required of the position, and usually that's half. A couple of the positions are what we call 0.4 positions, where it's 0.4 release time. But those people do report in their instructional leadership role to Dr. Craw. That's why they're all listed here. And then you have Mr. Rizzo with his assistant directors who both report to him, his administrative assistant. There is a district-wide special ed administrative assistant. And then, of course, the nurse supervisor reports directly to Mr. Rizzo. You have Dr. Tonks, who has his own analysis of his department, which includes the computer technicians, data analyst, district data coordinator, technology manager, and then, of course, Dr. Tonks. He has a much more thorough analysis, which I encourage you to look at. Then you have the principals. The principals have their assistant principals, their administrative assistants. In addition to that, the high school, you have the athletic director. So that's the next level, because the question was asked, what do we need to administer the administration, so to speak? And that's really what these people do. So I think I got close to what you're looking for. The next piece is to add in the responsibilities, the key areas of responsibilities, which we will have for you. But this is what our next level of analysis.
So just to clarify,
Sure.
there's no other administrator in this district that is not on this sheet.
Let me just think through it. So all the principals are there, all the assistant principals, the AD, all the central office folks. You have Mr. Del Mastro's there. I believe that's correct. I mean, there is a proposal in next year's budget to have that 0.6 guidance, but
Mhm.
this is existing.
Okay.
So that wouldn't be there. So yes, I believe that's true.
I have a question to the board members. You know, I don't want to do more additional work if we don't have to. Yeah, I'm cognizant of everything else we need to do. Job functions, job descriptions, is that something we need or not? I mean, just right off the shelf, or do you have to do?
It isn't, well, there's stuff right off the shelf, but it's not, some of it is more useful than other things.
Okay.
You know, so for instance, I mean, there are job descriptions for your central office positions, but they're a little bit outdated.
Yeah.
If you wanted me to do it, as I said before,
Okay.
I would want to do it right. And
Okay.
I can take the time, but, you know, whatever you
Yeah,
need.
I mean, my thought, again, the board, you need to decide, but I think this is a comment to try and move us along.
Yeah.
If it's the feeling of the board, and you've heard some of the community tonight echoing certainly a lot of the community, and as administration, we're highly sensitive to the real estate issues, the tax issues, all the rest. And indeed, one of the strengths of the Malone and McBroom report to you flagged the lagging recovery rate in Weston compared to competing communities on real estate values. You know, I worked with Mike on that. It's very real. I mean, we know it's lagging compared to New Canaan, Darien, and other communities. So we know how real those issues are. We know how real the great generosity of this town is. We understand that and embrace that. The issue is the growth. If the issue for the board is how do you get the growth number this year as low as possible, it's helping us come to you with different scenarios on that to think that through. If the issue is we have fundamental doubts about the quality of the system and do we need to think about a restructuring, it could be an and an or there. I'm not saying it's one or the other. That isn't going to get figured out in the next 4 or 5 days. Board digging into job descriptions, frankly, pulls you into a management function and a redesign function that I don't think you as board members want to get into, as opposed to those two big overarching questions. What's a growth number that you're comfortable with? Again, you're the governing body for education in Weston. You're not necessarily the Board of Finance or the Selectmen. You're the one saying, what's the growth number that we're convinced still allows us to be a great school system? You know, digging into particular job descriptions may distract all of us from that larger, bigger question. If you're saying, got to bring the growth number down, some of that is personnel, then you charge us with figuring out how to get that done and come back to you. That would
Yeah,
just be my thought.
I'm, you know, I leave it up to the other board members. I personally think that focusing on the bigger issues, which is the overall affordability, and I don't think it's a quality issue. It's more a structural issue that is there always room for reevaluating your organizational structure in light of everything that's going on in the community and the district? That's always a healthy conversation to have. I don't think it's a quality issue. I think it's an affordability issue, an efficiency issue, and then what are the implications to the quality of the education that you deliver as a result of any permutations or changes in the structure. I personally don't believe job descriptions are going to help me. I think that I think there are bigger structural issues that need to be dealt with. So for me, that's probably not a priority, but for others, it might be.
Tony, can I just add something? I mean, we also can proceed on the basis that if you, as you go through, if there's specific things, if you decide not to do that, we can answer verbally. We obviously all know ourselves and each
Mhm.
other's jobs extremely well. And we'd be happy to answer any questions if what you're talking about is, who's responsible for this, who's responsible for that,
Mhm.
rather than, but whatever you prefer.
I would prioritize this where, I have to leave it to fellow board members to,
Yeah, I'm gonna.
where do you want to prioritize this?
I think we know what we're facing. in addition to what the public is saying, I think the high spend per student, I think the low student to admin ratio, don't quote me on this, it's 120 something students to one
I don't-
administrator.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me.
And then the average is 140, I think, in the
Right.
DERG.
We're the smallest district, so
We're
that
the
doesn't
yeah.
surprise me.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
I
that's
think
roughly right. That's
Okay.
roughly
I
correct.
think that inefficiencies have to be unearthed, and the vision and the strategic direction has to come from you, and it's just a different way of looking how we do things. I think it's about time that we hit the reset button, and we all listen. We're all going into unfamiliar territory here, but it's got to be done. To avoid this tsunami, and I'm quoting someone in the audience. So I think for me that I have what I need. I think at the end of the day, the recommendations need to come from administration, and I just want to echo what you were saying earlier, Tony, in terms of children come first, obviously. So if I look at kind of the decrease of a 2.5% increase over last year and a flat, when I think of the cuts, it's almost like a bullseye. And it's, if the children are in the center and everything else is outside, what's furthest from the children first and foremost in terms of priority? And as that list goes down in terms of priority, then we get closer and closer to the children. But that's how kind of I would like to see something.
I mean, I might suggest, I mean, you have, as a board, put forward guidelines. I mean, they're very challenging guidelines. We have a workshop in a couple days. It may make sense for us as administration, not fully figured out, but to come back with, I mean, there are, what, 15 lines here, something like that, 10 lines. There's almost go line by line to ask for clarification or give some initial reactions. Actually, it won't be so initial because you have an expert group, but reactions on what that may mean for the impact on children and the impact on the quality work. And then this becomes a very useful resource to say, okay, that's your both, because this isn't all administrators. There's a fair amount of support staff here. But to say, given what you're trying to do to support children, how does this structure relate or not as we were to, move through these items? I mean, one of these items we did speak to at some length tonight. That was the one on special ed and the potential to reduce the administrative oversight there. But I mean, that would keep us on path. It would keep us tied to your guidelines, and then this can be a resource. Other documents can be a resource in that, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, and I think waiting to discuss those guidelines shouldn't stop you from continuing to work on those two scenarios along the way.
I would just like to speak for myself on this. I don't have a full comfort level with a lot of what's in here, and I feel like I need a lot more information before, I can move forward. So, from that standpoint, my expectation is to get a lot more detail than what's here. So, and that's where a lot of this comes.
And Hillary, you're referring to the.
Yes, and also our list.
That's
of
what I was.
This list. So,
Yeah.
I think for a variety of reasons, I don't even know. I mean, I've prioritized to a certain extent, but I think it behooves our community that we're able to drill down as much as possible so that we feel comfortable with everything that, we're putting forward. So that's my position.
Yes. One observation from my point of view is I think a lot of the what's has been identified here, right? We know the what's, and I think by the nature of the question of the board, we're trying to get to the how, right? So, as you hear our questions, we're really probing to say, how can things be different? And that's the dialogue that we're craving. So as my personal view is that we've asked for data and we've gotten data, but we want context and dialogue is what we're looking for. So I think in some of the line items that you'll see, some of us individually and collectively, we've formed some opinions about what could be done differently. Now, as you say, Bill, we're not the operators. We don't know that, but we are craving that dialogue. So we have a critical problem. We need critical thinking, and the sooner that we can get to the how, I think the better served everybody would be.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Victor. You know, I think when we went through this process last year and we looked at, you know, how we made decisions, we want to make sure that when we're making decisions this year, that we don't find ourselves in kind of a similar position next year. I mean, some of these projections we've all seen for what's happening in the town with real estate values and the mill rate, the assessments that a gentleman spoke about earlier. We just want to make sure that the decisions we're making are strategic and structural enough that we can start to see efficiencies in the coming years, so that it's not every time that we have a budget discussion that we're looking at ways to fill small holes or small problems, but instead that we've made, you know, fundamental changes that, you know, could actually be an opportunity when you're looking at some of the statistics Ruby was citing that could set our district apart if we're able to become more efficient. That could be a real advantage to us. So I really echo what my fellow board members are saying, and I really encourage innovative, structural change.
Again, I mean, the dialogue is what we need. We've got 5 days left, 6 days left by charter for you to deliver a budget. We're in a very typical public ed conversation at this point in this process. A number of things that we had brought to you, we've been working through the committee process with the innovation pieces, some efficiencies to reduce. We'll probably, one thing we do is remove all the targeted investments, which you yourself have flagged. So some of those innovations we'd have to pull back on, i.e. the SIL adjustment to bolster teacher issues, things like that. I think that dialogue can happen around this list. But again, I would pose a question to think very deeply on. Is this an issue of growth, which we can work hard to manage that? To what extent, though, is it an issue of this district's just not performing the level necessary? Because actually, the data does not support that. We are, if you look across the multiple measures, multiple indicators, with a small influx of students relative to our competing districts, we do incredibly well. And we can point to multiple examples of that. SATs in a band are going to move. Any quality researcher would say you look at where they are in that range, and they're in the range. Our ACT scores, we outpace almost every other district. We have some lags on the SBA. We've gone in to identify that, but we just outpaced everybody on the next generation science standards. New Canaan beat us on one area. I mean, but when there's an argument we're actually outperforming for our size. And part of that is we have staffed up and provided support and organization for our teachers to allow us to move into math and focus very effectively. That predated me. And to move into the science, very rigorous new science standards, to move into that over a 4 or 5 year phased period such that we began to see the results. The growth in APs. We've actually hit the ceiling there now, so we probably won't be an AP honor roll district for a while because we've hit that ceiling. High-performing districts such as us hit ceilings, so then you're sort of in the band. So again, I think the board has to think hard, and the push for efficiency, and I've been in this business 35 years, and that often boards push for efficiency, and you get reductions and cutbacks, but you don't get improvement. You actually get a slide back. And so I think that's where, if it's a growth number, to respect the community's outcry to please keep our real estate taxes as low as possible, if not flat, what's that growth number that allows this district still to be strong? Because, for example, if you were to take out any number of these cabinet positions, there's a set of work that just does not get done. It does not get done. If you take out an assistant principal position, there's work that just does not get done. So when families call for feedback, it'll be slower. Teacher evaluations will be slower. So in the move for efficiency, we may not get there. If you were to say, let's run 2 buildings with 1 principal, which might be creative, you then have to make sure you have the you just immediately reduce that coverage and all the rest. So I mean, those are things that, to get in the dialogue, we have a workshop upcoming. I mean, this list sort of lays, I think, dialogue points out for us to sort of say, here's how we would see that working or not. You have on here class size adjustment, or excuse me, section adjustment. I mean, one approach there would be to pilot for a year a slight uptick in the class size, see how that works, because then we can plan now for a different number of sections. As we have discussed with the board, if you put that question off, we're going to tend to hire lesser quality teachers. So, I mean, there's all this material that if, you know, getting in a dialogue as much as we can in the workshop, but you're not going to redesign the Weston Public Schools in the next, you know, 4, 5, 6 days. And no district in America redesigns its district through the budget process. But that's why we've been trying to work on a number of these things for a while.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think we have a long list of things we can't do. So I think we have to just figure out what it is we can do. And I think that that's part of understanding what the that's going through the scenario process. You know, that's the budget process. I mean, you go through scenarios, you look at what the art of the possible is, what the implications are. Is it something that we as a board could endorse or not? I mean, this is just this is the budget process as defined. I don't see any other way through this. I mean, that's our job. Right? You know, I think we're all willing to do that hard work in a very collaborative way, which is the only way through this. So you know, my view is I'd like to have more context in terms of what some of these adjustments might look like and the implications, and that would be the start of the how, and hopefully through that we'll get to a point where we all agree that this is probably, you know, we'll all know it when we see it, right? What the right flight path is going to be both this year and maybe set the stage for years ahead. You know. Any other? Any other final questions or comments from the public? What's that? Yeah. Anything from the principals or cabinet? Did
Oh, yeah.
there?
Yeah, Craig has, do you want to do your technology?
Yeah. Yeah, we can do that. Mhm.
So the document you're getting is the org chart for the technology, or specifically the IT department. So this also has on it not only the positions and titles, but then I put on sort of narrative descriptions of what each position does. So it's not a full-blown job description, but it relates to their day-to-day activities. On the IT side, there are 4 building level technicians, each assigned to a building. And that's the building that they work in, short of there being an absence that needs to be covered. The only building that does not have a full-time technician is Hurlbut. That technician is shared 2 afternoons a week with the Weston Police Department. Their primary responsibilities include the upkeep and maintenance of the laptops, Chromebooks, iPads, various other devices, end user support, password resets, etc., anything associated to technology, which can reach into telephones, the interactive classrooms, including the smart boards and projectors, and so forth. I gave on the sheet, there's also a breakdown of the estimate or the exact number of computers, printers, and so forth maintained in each building. The second side of the IT portion is data specialists. So the data team is the group that supports PowerSchool and the various systems that contain student information and are used to make the district operate. So that's everything from athletic registration, PowerSchool, which is the student information system, the system that's maintains the health records for the students, as well as instructional systems for testing purposes or typing tutors and so forth. Each of those roles have separate functions. The data specialist works directly with the student information systems, interfaces with the CILs and the building leaders to maintain both instructional records as well as operational records such as attendance. The analyst position works as the integration person between all of our systems that syncs the data, interfaces with parents on how to use programs at home. He's the individual that has removed work from the instructional staff. So one of the initiatives that we had started 5 years ago was the idea that you didn't want to be paying instructional staff to be helping parents log in at home. You didn't want them to have to enter usernames and passwords into various systems that they want to use in the classroom, because that's not the best use of instructional people's time. You want them teaching. So what we did here was move those kind of, okay, thinking of a word that isn't going to become insultive, tasks that don't require a teacher to a technician who has the skills to be able to do that, and then also is at a different salary range. The flip side, which I'm not overly proficient with photocopiers, as you can tell that when you flip it over, it's upside down, but it's my fault there. That's a breakdown starting with fiscal year 14 to current of the staffing. This shows a combined between what we call IT, which is information technology, and ET, which is education technology. On your ET side, the district had technology integrators. Over time, the technology integrators have been eliminated from the budget, with that work being shifted into the library media specialists in each building, as well as into the technicians. There is a full-time library media specialist in every building, which is essential and valuable to the school community. It also has a reduction of the administrative assistant position in fiscal year 20. So that overall, it's a reduction in staff from 13.4 in fiscal year 14 to 12.5. And then the last piece down there on the bottom are just highlights of some of the things that have gone on over the years. One of the biggest things in this window of time is that we've implemented both a one-to-one program at WIS, at the middle school, and devices on demand, which is the equivalent number of devices to the second grades. So we've increased devices greatly over the number of years, which is where the technicians assigned to the buildings became valuable, because technology isn't the ease of putting in a work order in between 24 and 48 hours, someone will respond. We now need to have a more on-demand approach where technicians sit in the libraries with the librarians to help coordinate. They meet with the assistant principals, with the idea being that if there's a problem happening, the assistant principals can redirect the technicians to the urgent problem to keep instruction going. Because many times the teachers come in looking to have their technology function, and when their technology doesn't, it can be interruptive to their lesson, interruptive to their planning, embarrassing to be standing in front of the room of 20 some odd kids and then not have your projector turn on. So those are all things that sort of wade into being able to support the classroom better in how we currently have the department aligned.
And if I may, I'll be fast, because many of you are new as board members and weren't here as we went through these efficiencies. Because if you look carefully here, we're doing more work with fewer staff, and I think this might be a place for the principals to weigh in a bit. Still dissatisfaction in the buildings as to the degree of support that we can provide. That's common across all of our sister districts, but we've arrived at a point here where there was an efficiency move to move more of the load with ET into the library media specialist. That was a difficult transition. It's gone fairly well, but it's had some moments because we've had to ask existing staff to take on more roles, because you see a very definite reduction in the ET side from 636 down to 45. Recall also that in the core budget that's presented to you, we had savings in this area. So in my higher ed days, this was called the bleeding edge technology. How do you just not, gruesome image, but bleed to death financially? We've been working really hard here in Weston now, the last, predating me, 4 or 5 years, to provide high quality digital and technology, but with fewer staff and having existing talent pick up pieces. Some might say, well, can we have the technicians shared across buildings? I think that would have a really negative effect on teachers and classrooms. So again, we can talk about that in more detail, but this is an area that's potentially very costly for the district, and we've been working very hard at a staffing level, an acquisition of software level, and a hardware acquisition to really make it efficient.
Greg, where do you see the changes in demand over the last 3, 4, 5 years in terms of your department? How do you, in terms of where are there stresses in different places now that weren't there in 3, 4 years ago or 5 years ago in terms of
Every
what you
student
called-
walking around with a Chromebook at the middle school,
Right.
that would be a stressor.
Okay.
And every time they accidentally drop it is even more of a stressor.
Okay.
But basically, the increase in devices at the WIS and at the middle school became a large portion of the work and a large portion of the urgent work. And even with backup devices, which we have, we do go through experiences where we can have upwards of 40 to 50 devices out for repair at the time. And you may recall is that when we did this program, we do all of our own in-house repairs. So we don't send out for repair. We participate in a warranty program on every device. When the device breaks, we request parts, they ship to us. Our in-house technicians do all that work. So we don't have, we've taken on that work from an outsourced model which was previously used as a cost reduction, which was done actually 4.5 years ago. I think similarly with the shift in logic of how technology is used and how it became more of a focal point. So now when a teacher goes and plans a lesson using a program called Smart Notebook and they expect it to work when they arrive, when that doesn't work, they need that assistance. And what we try to do is have that immediate assistance available, which is one of the reasons why the technicians report to the schools in the morning to be able to do that kind of work. Ruby's gonna.
Yeah, actually, this question's for Dan. So the Chromebook program at the middle school started in fiscal 18. So what % would you say of students use the school-supplied Chromebook versus bringing in their own computer from home? Oh, you don't allow computers from home? And are they allowed to take the Chromebook home? Okay.
We actually don't allow the bring your own device. It has to be the Chromebook that's school supplied.
Okay. And they can
There's a
take it
lot,
home then.
you might want to fill that out a
Yeah.
little bit, because Ruby wasn't on the board when that was discussed at length.
Boy, we're really having a problem with the microphone today. So part of that is the reason of monitoring and within the classroom. So if you bring in a personal device from home, the district can't actually install software on it to allow us to monitor. Within the middle school, we run a program called Go Guardian. What that does is allow the teachers to take control of those devices, monitor what's going on the devices. They can actually blink screens if necessary. They, within their own room, can create an environment where they restrict certain websites or they allow only specific websites. So it gives them more classroom control for classroom management. And that we can't do that, or that we don't have those same options when the device is not owned by us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Craig, for this document. I think this is really helpful, and it really helps me understand the department a lot better. And I just had one question as I'm kind of going through these positions and kind of thinking about the department more globally. What percentage, or how would you allocate your staff in terms of those that are, assisting the students and the teachers using the devices versus integrating the technology into curriculum type decisions? And how do you are there people that are focused on one versus the other, or?
So that would have been the role called technology integrator, which has now been eliminated over time.
Okay.
So that work has shifted to the library media specialists. So there's basically it's the library media specialists, and then I meet with the library media specialists, and then we work through projects. The middle school is looking at doing a blogging project on the environment, so that usually then is a combination of myself and the library media specialist of the middle school, who then talks with the teachers.
Okay.
But one of the things that has happened over time is that integration component with instructional knowledge has been reduced.
Okay.
What the technicians have the ability to do, because they're not teachers, they're not,
Right.
they don't have an instructional background, is they have the ability to say, a teacher says, I want to use the XYZ program, and they have the ability to sit and coach someone through, click here, do this, this is what this work means. But they can't really do lesson planning and design.
So if the teachers are wanting to incorporate technology more into any given classroom or program, that's something they would then
See their curriculum instruction leaders, so the SILs, their library media specialist are the two core areas.
And that was a shift over the last several years. I mean, that was a move of efficiency, which actually the SIL role doesn't appear on here, but that had been a very
No,
conscious
same.
move to, with existing roles, not just library media specialists, but the SILs, say part of that role would be support in this area. I mean, the principals have said to me separately, the building-specific techs are making a difference. I don't know if you want to speak to that. Again, we've reduced staff here, but tried to really maximize what we have. I don't know if you want us to help the board understand that, particularly new board members.
Hello. So our technician is Steve Cavallo, and he is there in the library every day. And it's made such a huge difference, where before we shared people, and then, it's very difficult when a tech is in another building, and then we have to wait for that tech. And perhaps our situation has become more dire than what he's working on over at the middle school, and then, drop stuff there, run over and help us. But to have Steve there, he's part of our Monday morning meetings, where we go over everything, any of the technology issues and the status on different things. We had a problem with midterms. One morning, there was some problems with some, well, Craig knows the specifics, but the IT team was there immediately. Steve was there. Giuselino came over. Craig was right there. I knew everything that happened. I dread to think if it was a few years ago and we didn't have that one person in the building to do that, where we would have been when the students arrived to take the test. So it makes a huge difference having him right there. He is always busy, always available to everyone. He works with kids, is very personable, goes around. I couldn't really quantify the amount of time he's perhaps working one-on-one with students, but it's just been a huge difference having him there every day to answer questions, figure out what we need to do, helps in any capacity, and we just love him. So I don't know who else wants to add anything, but it's a big difference.
I would just second that with James in our building, especially with the Chromebooks, but also other issues, printers, basically any technology, he's there to help or to escalate it to the next level where it can be fixed. Often, as Craig said, with teachers in classrooms, when technology that they've planned for their instruction for that day, if it's not working, he's there to fix it.
And I think that it was a good point that you made, Craig, when you're talking about, like, the turnaround time is so much better. You know, before, put in the school, do the technology thing, wait, call the help desk. You know, Steve's there in 5 minutes, right there in the classroom to fix whatever problem, and we do have glitches. And there's a lot of sophisticated software and equipment. You know, you look in those Project Lead the Way labs, all of those 3D printers and all that stuff. If he perhaps doesn't have the all of the expertise in that area, then he's right on the phone talking to someone else that does in the IT department, and it gets done like that. Thank you.
I'm wondering, Craig, if you can talk about the ROI on the Chromebooks and some of the software and the Go Guardian in the past couple of years, and just give your assessment.
So ROI questions would not be best answered by me in education. So ROI, and I actually have articles that I could share with the board if you'd like. ROI in education is not calculated the way it is calculated in business. It's actually calculated based on instructional impact of the devices. I would actually probably ask better for Patty and Dan to answer how teaching has changed since the implementation of the one-to-one devices, and how the lessons have changed since then, because they would actually know better right hands-on and what happens in their building.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's interesting because there often is some debate. Would it be better if we just had Chromebook carts in the classroom? Many of the teachers would prefer that, and maybe we wouldn't have the breakdown. But then the question is, which teacher would have it? Because they use it, obviously, in English, in writing. They use it in social studies on a daily basis. They use it in science. They even use it in the PFAs. They're using it in health class. They're using it in coding. They really do need these with them in their everyday classes on a regular basis. It has changed the way instruction takes place. Just some examples, obviously, whether they're doing their sixth grade coding unit and they're designing video type games, whether it's the research they do with Guardians of the Water Galaxy, whether it's the Google Docs, the editing, the collaboration. I just could go on and on, I think, and just talk about they are using these devices in virtually every classroom on an everyday basis. And I would just add both in school and at home.
So I would say the same for the intermediate school. Our technology is used in almost every single classroom. We started out primarily with the reading and the writing, and then like in social studies. But now our science is so integrated in with technology. Our Amplify program is they're able to do labs and conceptual understanding of things they could never be able to do without being on a computer. The whole unit on space, and they're able to really be able to understand concepts in a different way than they could before using computers. I think for our students, one of the things that the change that I made in having the Maker Tech classes, because technology has become so critical and become, it's a tool that all of our students are learning to use, so it's important that we put that instructional time into the day as well, or into the year, so that students really can use it appropriately, digitally, safely, and then preparing them as they get further up into the middle school. Our students do not take their computers home. They live in school, which I think is appropriate at this age.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's almost, I mean, every day they're using their computers.
I also think it's not just the technology, but if you look at the software and the expenses of all the software, and then you look at the number of students impacted by the software, then you can kind of get a little bit of sense of how important it is. Like the Turnitin software, for example, is $6,000, but when you think that 800 students at the high school use that in English class and in some of the social studies classes, that's a huge impact for the number of students that actually use it. I mean, I'm looking down the list and I'm thinking of just the numbers of students that use that software. So when you look at, yeah, there's a lot of money in software, but that software, when you look at it, at which students avail themselves of that software, I think that also gives you a sense of sort of your academic return on investment for particular disciplines and programs.
I can add at the primary level, a lot of what has already been said applies to the elementary school as well, but I would just want to point out it truly is completely integrated now into how we design our instruction and our lessons and in the classroom. You know, I've been doing this a really long time, and it used to be, let's design lessons, and then what are we going to do about the technology? It is one and the same now. You know, when we think about how we're going to design a lesson, that is fully, the digital tools are fully integrated. And at the very young level, for a lot of the students, it gives them access to communicate their thinking, whereas they may not be fluent writers yet. They may have access to tools that will help them compose stories or to articulate their thinking, whereas they may not be able to do that in other ways yet. So it's very valuable. It really gives us an in-depth understanding of what they're thinking, and they're able to better communicate it. So, and when we do have a technology need, if something isn't working the way it should be, we really need it fixed very quickly because of the way we use the technology in our classrooms.
Oh, sorry. Please.
Sorry.
Thanks.
My name is Alyssa Stoltz. I have children in Hurlbut and Wiss. And just along the lines of the technology conversation, I'm hearing a lot that it's really integrated into the classroom, and I see that with my children, that technology is integrated in everything. But I was wondering if we have any data on whether the integration of technology has actually improved learning outcomes, or whether it's just become another tool. You know, so one, is the cost justified, but more for my concern is, I mean, I know that this, as a parent, this is something that I struggle with a lot, is my children are so dependent on screens, and I'm constantly fighting that. And in a way, is there a possibility that some of this reliance on technology is potentially negatively impacting and making children feel like they can't learn in any way other than staring at a screen, or they can't compose writing by writing down on paper? And so I wasn't sure if there's any data or research. Like, an example that comes to mind is back when my kids were babies, there were the Baby Einstein videos, which were supposed to help your children to learn all of these things. And then it turned out that was like a total fraud. And, really it was no better than any other screen time. So I was just wondering what the research is on the technology that's used in the classroom and how it relates to learning outcomes.
I'll start with that. I don't have hard data to correlate that. I agree with you. It's something we need to do purposefully, and I think one of the biggest benefits is the ability for us to differentiate for a wide variety of student needs in the classroom. And Craig will tell you we have these screen time debates all the time. I'm always after Craig with what's the latest research, what does it say, because at the very young level, we don't have one-to-one devices at the primary level. We have on demand. So if there's a lesson or a need in the classroom and the teacher wants to use the technology to enhance the lesson or to make it more accessible or more tailored to an individual need, that's where really we use it. We don't, at our level, they don't have one-to-one devices. So we're very conscious of the balance between screen time and other ways of learning.
I think for us, it's really the balance, because it's really about the technology is wonderful and really it is integrated, but there's also a time not to be using technology, and it's about how much screen time they have. There's a lot of research out there that really talks about, especially when students are reading nonfiction, they really should be reading, and so that's why we spend a lot of money on books and really bring that in, because they really. And we've had lots of discussions with our teachers about really the importance of reading, not on a screen, but really reading books and doing the jots and notes. And so it's really finding that balance of when this is a great time using technology and when maybe this isn't the best. So, right, we don't want them just to be on technology just for the sake of being on technology.
Right.
But yeah, it's finding that balance. Yeah.
I go that. I'm glad you said that. I was going to make that same point. Finding time when students are not using technology. But your original question is a challenge for us because all of our testing, for the most part, has gone to online testing. So when the students take the state test, the Smarter Balanced Assessment, when they take their NWEA MAP tests, all of those tests are online. Even the language competitions now are online competitions. So we do think it's important that students learn how to use the devices in the assessment setting.
Yeah, I think from a it's an excellent question, and I think from a district perspective, it's why within our goal structure, digital learning and technology is there, but it's a supportive piece. The screen time issue is very much a concern to us. My simple phrase is you cannot succeed in college or career without being digitally proficient. Witness the whole swing on assessments. If we're not online, our students can't take their assessments. Many of us who have children in college know that paper is disappearing. There's a push here to have paper disappear. We're very conscious about not just parking students here and saying, thus you're learning, but to have this be a supportive piece. And I think that value approach is shared amongst all of the principals here. But again, it's a strategic value given where our students are headed, be it career or college. And what, at least for the board and the community, tried to show is we're trying to be as efficient as possible in this essential area. Because at this point in education, digital is essential, but just so it's the right balance.
And then one other question. I wanted to return to a comment that Dr. McCursey made before we started the technology conversation about how now that obviously we can't restructure the entire district in the next 6 days, during the budget cycle. And so this is my third year in the Weston schools and really my first year following the budget process closely. And so I'm not sure how it's supposed to work, but I think everybody is pretty much on the same page that with decreasing enrollment projections, an increase of 3 to 5% year over year every year is not sustainable. The property values are going to end up going down as the mill rates go up. This is a problem that we're all seeing coming. But it feels like so we debate this, then the budget will, get passed in some form or another. And then do we return to business as usual, or is that the opportunity to take a hard look and prepare for next year, knowing that this is going to, because this is the same conversation that I was seeing sort of at a high level last year about we have this disconnect potentially between enrollment, tax base, and
Yeah,
the cost of the school. So what is the process after the next 6 days for making sure that we're looking forward in contract negotiations, in staffing levels, in, you know, attrition projections, you know, to make sure that all of that aligns with what we are projecting over the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, are going to be the budgetary needs for the district.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from the administration standpoint, it's year-round. So we had an optimization effort going on within the curricular area and the facilities area starting last year, preceding last year's budget process and carrying through. So some of the innovations we were looking at that carry a little slight cost dollar to them, those may things that we have to hold off on. But the reason that data on FTE is important is as enrollment drops, we've been dropping FTEs. The administration level has stayed arguably flat with a slight uptick in the special ed area driven by student need. That's a question before us. You know, can we continue to provide the supports we can without making that adjustment? But that data shows very clearly that, you know, we've dropped close to 15 FTE lockstep with enrollment drops. So we do pay attention to that.
But the
But again,
budget's still
other
going
ways
up
to
5%.
optimize what we're doing is and to try and, you know, the efficiencies in the technology area, cutting back on staffing there, shifting responsibilities into other existing staff. So we've been looking to optimize there quite a bit. It's not just simply been in this process. The presentation was purposely very lean. On slides 12 and 13 of the presentation we gave, there are 9 drivers there of what's driven us to that take away the target investments, that pushes us to 5.5. We got to get that number down. We know that. We're at about 4.8 with a set of cost factors, some of which we knew last year would hit us. The paying for dental out of the internal services fund, that we knew that's a big factor. This transportation cost, it isn't simply an outsourcing issue. There's some other things going on there. We'll speak to the board in more detail in the workshop. There are a set of other drivers there that push us up to that number. We've done a multi-year look. The board saw that. We're looking at 3% growth. That is the reality. And then Weston has to say, for the quality of education we have, the staffing, the administration, the supports we provide, the social workers, the school psychologists, all the rest, are we willing to maintain that? And it may be that we can't. And this is the kind of discussion going on in districts across the country. It's a new one in Durgay. Our sister districts are not going through such severe cutback discussions at this point. But that's something we're conscious of. But again, it's not just in this month. And you can go back through all of our committee minutes and all the rest, particularly curriculum committee and anything related to technology and facilities to look at the efficiency. Also a big question is the footprint. How many buildings? And we had worked very hard last year to bring to the board a document analyzing could we be in 3 buildings or 4 buildings. If you're thinking about trying to bend a cost curve in Weston, that may be the place, but we actually found you might have to push the costs up. But that question right now is before where it should be, is before the town bodies with the board working on that. They were smart, just a consensus document support, not a vote, but a consensus that this now needs to get into the town discussion. But that's very much looking long-term at optimizing.
Thank you.
Something else? Bill?
Well, I
Yeah.
guess just ahead of the workshop, and the principals and cabinet will be with you Thursday morning. I may need to see the principals after this to do a slight schedule shift.
Mhm.
What I'd like to do, if it's all right with the board, is come into that workshop. There may be some additional questions we can speak to, the transportation question. But I'd really like to have us literally go down your guidelines list and have a dialogue about what we see here, where we need clarifying questions in terms of the thinking, where we already have answers for you. You may not like the answers, but we can at least give you those answers, have a discussion around those answers. And, you know, we may have a working growth number based on things for you to begin to grapple with Thursday to sort of see where are we. Again, Victor, you put that idea of dialogue discussion. I would just sort of suggest that that's how we structure that workshop.
Yeah. Yeah, and also if there's things on those guidelines that are missing, that you, as you know, you think that is definitely a recommendation and a place where you think that we missed and you can go, that's certainly something, part of the
Yeah,
discussion
no,
as
that
well.
we, no,
Yeah.
we've already, I've already
Yeah.
seen a few things that would
Yeah.
add to, on the helpful side in terms
Yeah.
of the lower growth number. so.
Yeah. Anything else? Have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.